We are recording now.
Fantastic. It is go time. Just want to first off say thanks to you all for making time, joining us on the next installment of Navigating the New Normal. I think we really are in a new normal now. I cannot believe we have been at this thing for some months. So hopefully you all are staying safe. You and yours are well. We realize that your inbox is probably flooded and you have a lot of opportunities to really lean in, engage with some good content. So we appreciate the fact that you all trusted us enough to join us over here at TechBirmingham. Super pumped about what we're going to be speaking. Just briefly, don't want to take it for granted that everybody has been with us in the past, but TechBirmingham, we really try to serve as the voice of the technology ecosystem and the community at large. And so this is an extension of that. We wanted to make sure that as people try to pivot and reposition throughout this entire situation, that we were still leaning in, meeting people where they were at, and delivering content in new ways, but also in content that was relevant to the situation. And so that has brought us to today. And happy to introduce Donnie Garvich. He's a wonderful, wonderful friend. He also happens to be a TechBirmingham board member. So he's not too hot on good judgment, but we appreciate the fact that he's decided to join us. He's just been absolutely remarkable. And of course, that work translates into everything that he does throughout the community. And so he'll be unpacking a little bit about just the creative challenges that a lot of people and a lot of teams experience and how to really navigate that, pardon the redundancy, but how to navigate that. And I think this is even more timely and even more relevant given the fact that we now don't have the benefit of face-to-face interaction. So we might miss some of those social cues. And so it's going to be even more important that we extend grace, that we recognize and appreciate how we all show up creatively and how we harness that for good. Donnie and two Ravens, they are also TechBirmingham board members. And so I am sure he would want to make sure you all are TechBirmingham members as well. Don't sound up on the board. We got enough. But we definitely want you all to be a part of the community because quite honestly, this cannot happen if it's not for you guys. And if you're a part of a large organization, make sure you let them know about what it is that we're doing as well. Feel free to reach out to us at any time. We want to make sure that we're delivering content that is valuable and that is relevant to you all. So all that said, I have spoken long enough. Christina, just briefly, is there anything else that we would like to offer up before we take it and get into the content with Donnie?
No, just a reminder of the formatting. So Donnie would like to, he works really well with getting feedback. So we're going to try to monitor that though, so that we can help get the content out. But if you have comments or you have questions, you can either put them in the chat or there's a Q&A. Go ahead and put all your questions there. Rebecca and I will be monitoring all those questions and we'll make sure that, you know, as time allows, we can get those answered. Donnie's going to go through his presentation and then at the end, we'll have some Q&A. So again, Rebecca is in the chat. And one other thing, I just added the link. If you're not a member for TechBirmingham, there's a link right there in the chat. So you can go check that out after the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Christina. Check out that app. You got to copy and paste. I don't know, Zoom has to get on it, but copy and paste that link. And then again, as Christina mentioned, this will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TechBham. That is BHAM. With that said, I will remind you all, Outkast is one of the best groups. Andre 3000 is the greatest rapper. Living, at least, I'm willing to concede, maybe not ever. And Donnie has the voice of an angel. So with that, we'll go ahead and turn it over to you, sir.
Oh, so you're going to go there first. That's what we're going to do. We're going to, all right. Well, let me share my screen or part of my screen. I don't want you guys seeing all the magic. So you should be seeing a presentation now. Is that correct?
You are good to go.
Good to go? All right. So I appreciate you guys' introduction. And like like Dion and Christina mentioned, today we're here to talk about navigating the new normal. And it needs to be reiterated because none of us really know what the new normal is. And so first I want to take a moment and I want to thank the team at TechBirmingham for all that you guys do. Dion, Christina, Rebecca, you guys really help organize a very disorganized community sometimes. And you do a lot for our tech and entrepreneurship community. I want to thank you guys for asking me to present today. So I'm really excited to share some of the stuff we've been working on. And as Christina and Dion mentioned, I'm a managing partner with a company called Two Ravens, which is a consulting firm. And I'll get back to that in just a moment. I'm presenting today on behalf of Hidden Innovators. So I'll tell you why that matters. So let me make sure this works. That worked. Okay, so as any good consultant should do, I'm going to start by saying what we want to cover. So we're going to have a bit of an introduction where I'm going to tell you a little bit about me and us and what we do. And then I'm going to tell you some things we heard in the community, some things we learned when we looked into what we heard, what we found out was really going on. And then I'm going to tell you what's been happening since there's a global pandemic. And then how can we improve? So I want to cover those things today. So I'm going to check in as we go and make sure that we've checked off that list. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Donnie. And I spent the last 2 decades or so working in the technology and innovation space. I've written code, I've architected systems, so I've been technical. But my roles have primarily revolved around coordinating, coaching, and supporting teams of very high-performing individuals. That's generally why people really wanted to hire me. And so I've worked in large companies and I've worked in small companies. And I've worked with larger companies and I've worked with even smaller companies. And I would pretty routinely hear executives and leaders say similar things. They would say things like, "We have the best people." And then they would follow that up pretty quietly with, "I wish my people were more innovative." Or as a company, we're going to have to be more innovative or creative if we want to compete. Now, I would hear this all the time. And so 2 years ago, when Two Ravens was hearing this, we decided to take a consulting approach, learn more, use that as practical information, and then do research into what was really going on. Why was this happening? And so this work has turned into a company that we call Hidden Innovators, which we are currently launching. So hey, new Birmingham startup, yay. And I'm going to be presenting a little bit of that work today. It is a huge amount of work, but what I'm going to give you today is a little bit of a taste of it that I think was really appropriate for what we're trying to achieve, which is navigating the new normal. So to get started, we wanted to go meet high performers. What did executives consider high performers, and who are these people? And these leaders would pretty consistently point to a few key people within their organizations. And so we heard these people called everything from rock stars to ninjas to wizards. You've heard these, and we heard all kinds of other names. And so that's where we started. We started by studying rock star ninja wizards. What made these people special? And we were led to believe that there was something so unique about these people that their ability to innovate and to remain creative in their work was somehow special. It's something you just couldn't teach. We heard that more than once. And so we began to wonder, was there anything that these people had in common? Were they different in different organizations or situations? And so we went out and we met a lot of these people. We evaluated them. We talked to them. And yes, we are qualified to evaluate. We have a PhD in psychology keeping us honest the whole way. Hey, Lindsay. And we learned a lot about these people. I mean, we learned a lot. And one of the things we learned is that they were all creative people, which really is not that much of a surprise. But here's what's important about that. We learned that they were creatively unique, but they were not uniquely creative. And I'm going to come back to that. Don't hang on it. It's foreshadowing. Okay. So the point I'm making right now is that all humans are creative. Being creative is part of what makes us human. Now, as it turns out, if you go talk to most people for just a little bit of time, and if you really want to dig, you can find out a lot about how they are creative in some aspect of their life. There's a spoiler alert here. People rarely feel they're most creative in their work environment. Some people were able to be creative at work and some were not. And here's an interesting bit. Some of these other people, the people who worked with these rockstar ninja wizards, were extremely creative. So why wasn't their creativity front and center? Why weren't they the ones being seen as innovators? So we needed to learn how companies and these rockstar ninja wizards were solving their most difficult problems. And as it turns out, they were using what we call the Hippo method. Now, Hippo is actually spelled HPPO, and it stands for the highest paid person's opinion. So here we were, an executive, not coincidentally the highest paid person in the room, had spent months, or maybe even years, making sure that the smartest, most capable people that they could hire and retain are in this room. And when an important decision comes up and needs to be made, or difficult problems arise, the most valuable asset that these people possessed, their creative viewpoint, it went into hiding. Now, obviously, this is how creativity and innovation become rarer and harder to achieve. And as companies grow and scale, there are more and more Hippo moments. Now, between peers, let's talk about peers for a moment. Between peers, both parties will more often refuse to concede. And we sometimes call this a creative difference. You've heard that term. It breaks up bands and sports teams and movie production crews all the time. But in companies, unlike in bands, everyone is not equal. So now we have this built-in Hippo escape hatch from conflict. And it's often easier to use than even stating an opposing viewpoint. We just defer to the Hippo. And yep, this often avoids very uncomfortable conflict, but it is not always the best path forward. No matter how good our Hippo is, the multiple viewpoints provided by a team is always better. Even the best need a team if they truly want to be the best. And smart leaders, they know this. Okay, so I'm about to get into some details that will seem potentially tangential. So I want to pause for a moment and prove that we're making some progress. What does all this people are creative stuff have to do with working in a pandemic? Well, our 2 years of research uncovered as much or more about team dynamics as it did individual creativity. Now, I'm not going to go deep on team development today as much as I might like to because I love that stuff. But I do need to give everyone a little bit of information to provide some context for what is currently going on in our crazy new world. So let's talk about teams for a moment. So I was in Philadelphia in February, and I had the pleasure of listening to Dr. Eduardo Salas. He is one of the foremost researchers on team development, and he was giving a keynote presentation. Now, Dr. Salas is currently working with NASA to try and figure out how we can put several people in what amounts to a Red Bull can and shoot them at Mars. So he knows his stuff. And one of the things he talked about in his presentation was the 7 C's of team development. Those are listed on the left. And I'm going to come back to those in a moment because they're incredibly important. But first, I need everyone to understand a little bit at a base level what the stages of team development are and how teams get from one stage to the next. I'm going to go fast, so feel free to email me for more information if you're interested. What I will say is there's a lot of research in this field, and our research that we've done is kind of standing on the shoulders of giants in this particular area. Okay, so on the right, teams always follow the same development path. They cannot skip steps, and they often have to recycle. Now, what I mean by recycle is, let's say the team is at norming on this graph. They may go all the way back to forming if something changes, like management, a new team member, a project scope, or maybe a pandemic. So the best teams have learned to achieve this recycle quickly, and it takes less time and energy to get back up to speed. So how do they do it? Well, some very specific things have to happen to get from one stage to the next. And we needed to understand those things to understand how the best teams accomplish them. So in forming, you're selecting team members. It's mostly a coordinating effort for leadership and managers. Now, once team members are together, this is the trick. Once you're together, you have to build what's called a shared mental model. Now, a shared mental model is just a set of ideas that everyone understands. It could be something like, hey, this is what we want to achieve together. But this stage also includes the beginnings of team habits as part of this shared mental model. This is the way we act. This is the way we talk to each other, are examples of those. And these things happen whether you're intentional about it or not. So once a team has this shared mental model, they move on to storming. And storming is, as a stage, almost exactly what it sounds like. This is where team members often have what we would consider unproductive conflict. And they try to figure out who fits where, They try to figure out who fits where, who is dominant, and things of that nature. What is the social standing in this team? Now, if you're a team leader or a manager in this stage, you're probably coaching. You're trying to manage creative conflicts, and you're trying your hardest to keep people on track. Now, most teams, if we're honest about it, never make it past this stage. But the ones who do will have built a certain amount of trust between team members. This conflict, it creates trust between people who are either willing to stick it out or submit. Now, these silent habits that I talked about in forming, they are now becoming the group normal. So once you've had the fights and you've built some trust, you're moving into what's called norming. And you can see productivity is getting back up. So this is where a team understands each member's role, and the members have begun to give each other more space to be who they really are. Now it's just a matter of the team getting good at what they do together, which generally means figuring out processes. Now, I don't necessarily mean, documented methodologies like, say, Agile, although those are helpful. But what I mean is how a team, a unit, works best and most efficiently together. It's those unspoken processes that I'm talking about. Now, once a team has a shared mental model, once a team has fought each other and built some trust, and once they have figured out these really efficient internal processes, they may move on to performing. Now, this is where we all want to be. When we start a team, this is what we're hoping for. And at this stage, the team has gotten really, really good at whatever it is that they have been asked to do. Whatever their shared mental model said we want to achieve, they're getting good at it here. They're really good at it. Now, very, very few teams reach this stage. I've asked people in companies and they're like, oh, our teams are performing, and it's not true. Normally, when you think they're performing, they're actually in norming. Sometimes they're in storming and you just don't know the difference because you fight so much. So we have the stages. Let's get back to the 7 C's of team development, because this becomes really important now. So the 7 C's of team development, I'm not going to go into them deep because they should be fairly self-explanatory, are capability, cooperation, coordination, communication, cognition, coaching, and conditions. Now, these are the 7 C's of team development according to Dr. Salas, not me. And these are the things that you must have mastered in order to reach that elusive performing state. I bring this up to make a very important point right now. And it's one that Dr. Salas made. He gave his keynote presentation. He opens it up for Q&A, and he says, before I take any questions, I'm going to ask the first one for you, because this is the first question I always have to answer. Which of the 7 C's is the best indicator of team success? And he says, I cannot tell you that. So a man that's been doing this research for 40 years cannot tell you which one is the best predictor of success. But what he can tell us, and what he did tell us, was, I can tell you which one, when done poorly, will always derail teams. It's conditions. Without the proper conditions, without the right environment, you can get everything else right, and your teams are still going to struggle. So this is where I'm going with all of this talk about teams. If very few teams ever get past norming, and the single thing that can derail a team is conditions, what does a global pandemic do? It absolutely changes the conditions. Now, if you were a remote first team, let's say, and the pandemic hits, you may have had a lot of these already figured out. But most organizations still depend on people being face-to-face for at least a couple of these items on this 7 C's list. Now, the good news is that over time, you can normalize these conditions again. And we're seeing some of that. Teams are getting more productive even though they're remote. Companies are figuring out how this works. Some companies are even considering sticking with it, which I completely support sometimes. The bad news is when people go back to the office, you're going to have to recycle again. So you got to remember, you can't skip steps here. And if your team recycled when a pandemic started, they're going to recycle when it ends. So the question now becomes, if I can't skip steps, if my teams cannot skip steps, and I'm going to have to do all this again anyway, how do I accelerate it? Hey, I'm glad you asked. You accelerate it by really knowing your team members and helping your team members get to know each other. Now, if you noticed, all of these team stages that I brought up required a series of successful human-to-human relationships to move to the next stage. And at the end of the day, teams are made up of people. And those people will decide whether or not that team progresses. Now, plenty of companies that we've talked to put time, money, and energy into getting to know their people better. And I would applaud every one of these efforts. There are certainly several options available to do it. However, what we found is that the available approaches, while extremely informative and very interesting, are often too complex to become useful on a day-to-day basis. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. Teams need the tools to understand and talk about team members in a way that is simple and practical in everyday situations. So this is what we've been working on for the past 2 years. We call it the science of social creativity. So you remember when I said I was foreshadowing earlier? Well, what we found is that while everyone is indeed creative, people process their creativity very differently. So differently, in fact, that people who are creatively different often cannot overcome that difference, no matter how hard they try. So a quick story to make this point for me. My wife and I have been married for over 20 years, and we get along swimmingly. Now, in the midst of this research, I was explaining to her how differently we see things. And the only thing she could say to me was, "Are you really that messed up inside your head?" So these are two people who have learned to work together through thick and thin. But we still had fundamental differences so great that not only could we not communicate them, we couldn't even fathom that the other person's point of view was so different from ours. We just did not have the tools or words to understand our fundamental creative differences. These same differences are a fundamental gap between team members, and other issues spring from it. So we needed to understand that. We kept working and learning, and we were able to create personas that show these creative differences. And it gives us a new way to talk about them. So what we will tell you is people are one of 3 personas. They are either a dreamer, who, when something new happens, a dreamer prefers to imagine the possibilities of how it could change the world around them. Or they're a sage. When something new happens to a sage, they prefer to learn as much about the event as possible and hopefully even create new knowledge around it. Or maybe they are a tinkerer, which is what I am. When something new happens for a tinkerer, they want to create something as soon as possible. They want to take a new experience and make it into something tangible. So it's really important that I call this out here. Our personas, unlike the personality assessments that you may be familiar with, they do not tell you who you are. Instead, they tell you how you prefer to be creative. Now, as a high-performing individual, you are likely a mix of these, and you can probably adjust your viewpoints when the need arises. However, everyone prefers one persona over the others. And knowing which one that people prefer more often than not can tell you how they will think about or approach a situation. Finally, on this point, and I really can't go too deep into this today, but groups, teams, and companies all have these personas as well. You see, as it turns out, the easiest way to avoid creative conflicts is to hire people who are creatively similar. Now, this is great if you're a sage in a sage organization, like let's say a university, but it absolutely sucks to be a dreamer in a sage organization, or to be a sage in a tinkerer organization, or a tinkerer in a dreamer organization. Now, as a result of this truth, people who are creatively different from their team or organization, they feel out of place. And eventually, they either give up or burn out. So let's talk briefly about what happens when you add complexity, maybe by assembling people into groups and teams. Now, on this slide, there's a lot of information, and it shows some of the things we've learned about how these different personas integrate or don't. And I'm not going to go all into the slide. I can make this available if you're curious. But for now, let me just say that these personas are so fundamentally different that they can either be each other's worst enemy or their greatest ally. And that is based on exactly one thing: whether your team members view their differences as strengths or weaknesses. From our research, we can tell you that the best teams are teams that have a balance of these personas. Diverse viewpoints exist. They are equally considered. People are given the freedom to be themselves. And the team praises creative differences instead of attacking them. Not coincidentally, these are also the kinds of teams that can more often and more quickly reach a state of high performing. Now, earlier I told you that you can't skip any of the steps on your path to becoming a performing team. And the question there was, well, then how can we accelerate this process? I'm happy to tell you that I believe you can short circuit the steps between the stages. You can hack the team development roadmap by upfront having a solid shared mental model, trust, and maybe even processes that empower your people and teams. So in closing, I can't tell you what's going to come next for your team. We live in interesting times, and anyone who claims to know how things are going to go is just guessing. But I will say that no matter what, no matter the times, the shortest path to success for every team has been, and always will be solid, trusting, interpersonal relationships between motivated and engaged people with a shared goal. Your teams are going to recycle. They're going to form, storm, maybe even norm, and if you're really lucky, maybe they'll even perform. Members will change. Situations, conditions will change. But every single time it happens, you're going to depend on the people inside the team to figure it out. And that requires an enormous amount of creativity. So, in my opinion, the best way to create a culture of success, a culture of innovation, no matter the situation, is to do so one individual at a time. Invest in finding the best people and then giving them the tools to understand each other and the words to communicate and build trust effectively. Then, whenever they're assembled into a team, they'll at least have a good start. And that's what we call creating the right conditions. Then you just trust them to do their magic. So that's what I've got today. But as a good consultant should, let's recap just to make sure I checked all the boxes. So what did we hear? Well, people told us that innovators were special, and we wondered why. So what did we learn? Well, it turns out they are creative, motivated, and engaged. But it also turns out lots of people are creative. So why are others not as motivated and engaged? What's really going on? Well, people are fundamentally creatively different from their peers, and this creates conflict. Conflict makes people feel bad, so they become hidden, being quiet instead of creative. This makes people feel less motivated and engaged. Well, what happens when there's a global pandemic? Well, during a global pandemic, conditions change, and all teams recycle. This can be an opportunity for savvy companies to get better at building teams from the individual up. So how do we improve? By engaging each individual in their preferred ways. Great teams require everyone to be creative, motivated, and engaged. Now, for our part in this puzzle, we felt that the world lacked the in-depth but simple tools necessary to achieve this, so we built them. Now we are attempting to help engage creativity in more people and build more innovators so that more teams can make more amazing things. Thank you guys for your attention. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and hopefully people have questions, because it's always weird when people don't have questions. So thanks, guys. Do I play now?
Christina, I think you're on mute.
Oh, it's weird now. It gets really weird when there's.
So sorry. My headphone has this auto mute feature in it. Sometimes I forget. Okay, so we have a question from the audience.
Uh-oh.
What is your test for these? Okay, so EJ wants to know more about the hidden innovators testing, which you didn't share about.
No, I was hoping to help people. So hidden innovators, one of the things that we offer in hidden innovators is an assessment, and it's a test, and it tells you which of these creative personas that you are and what mix you are. The goal there, it also tells you the results of the test tell you how to communicate with people who are not like you, how you're likely to trigger them, how they're likely to trigger you, how you can best support them, and how they can best support you. So the assessment, it takes about 20 minutes. You can get it online at hiddeninnovators.co. It's not a typo. It's co, not .com. So hiddeninnovators.co. You can go take the assessment today if you want, but it gives you some good information and helps you be more creative and more fulfilled with your team.
We'll get the link out to everybody in our follow-up that we send out to everybody. Let's see. Paul Martin is asking, how do you see this playing out with satellite teams? How do you build that performing dynamic?
Yeah, that's a question we've been talking about a lot lately. And in particular, Dr. Sutton has been looking at what remote means, what's different. And there's a lot of knowledge to be gained right now. But what I will tell you is in-person social cues are core to how we communicate. And video conferencing is not a perfect replacement for sitting across the table from someone. And so what I will say is the shared mental model becomes really important because conflicts become easier to occur. And what I mean by that is if I'm talking to someone and we're just not getting each other, it's really nice to be able to say, hey, I know you're a sage and I know you're just trying to press pause right now so you can learn more, but I got a deadline. So how do we get you comfortable with me moving forward? So those moments of grace, that singular moment of grace can either build a relationship, or if you turn it into an attack, it can break a relationship. And so when you're remote, taking that moment of stepping back and saying, I don't know why we're having a conflict here. Let's look at it. Are we just creatively different? Is a huge step, and it can help teams understand each other better.
That's great. Gary Purdy asks, how do you work with organizations to cultivate the culture you describe?
Hey, Gary. So Hidden Innovators, like I mentioned, Hidden Innovators is a startup that we're currently in the process of launching. We have some of the tools built. What we do is the assessment is key. So knowing yourself is key. Knowing your teammates is key. Once you understand that, you can sit down and put a group together and say, this is how we want to solve some problems. So Hidden Innovators provides tools around that. It's the assessment. What are you? How are you creative? How are other people creative? It's the tools that show you what a team looks like. How are they being creative together? What are the relationships most likely doing? And then it's workshops where we sit down and say, hey, here's how this works. Put people in a room and have them solve problems together. The advanced, if you really want to build a culture, the process piece, which I mentioned, is we use design thinking. And so we do design thinking workshops where we take all this kind of fundamental core information and we build it into actually solving problems together. Because what we find is in organizations, a lot of times, the habits are so entrenched that you have to have someone from outside come in and break them and say, there's got to be new habits and you've got to start doing things a new way. Complaining about each other behind each other's backs is not going to help. Giving each other moments of grace will. And so we come in and consultatively give workshops.
And to follow up with that, April Benatello asks, what happens after the assessment of hidden innovators? What do you do with your consulting practice to help these teams become better innovators?
Yeah. So April, hey April. So what was interesting is we were doing this process, and that's how Two Ravens kind of looked at it. So when we were coming in and doing consulting, we were doing this. This is the process we were using, and it was super effective for companies. And we had companies asking us, how do I do this myself? That was the biggest question we would get asked. Oh, it's great that I can hire a team of you guys to come in and you can do great, but how do I make my people do great? So that was one of the triggers for us to start looking into how do we help companies do this on their own. And so once you've taken the assessment, you move into a realm where you've got to apply the knowledge. And so that's what the workshops help people do. Okay, if Christina and I are creatively different, how do we communicate? And then practice the communication. Once you understand how to communicate and you've built the trust, this is all that team development cycle, then we're going to start looking at processes. We use design thinking. We think it's great. People ask us about, hey, design thinking and hidden innovators versus Agile. We get that question a lot. So Agile is really good at telling people how to build something. It's really bad at telling people what to build. And so this process is actually telling people, well, this is what you should be building, because you have to have those creative viewpoints present and not intimidated to do that. And so April, we can talk more, but what I'll tell you is Dreamer, Tinker, and Sage directly relates to desirability, feasibility, viability. And you have to have all three of those things to have a successful project. So beyond that, we actually do provide consulting services where we come in if a company says, I've got to hit the ground running with this. We do consulting services where we come in as a team and we will help you solve problems and we will bring your team members in and show them how this works.
How long does a process like this last? I mean, do you have when you come in, do you assess the situation and then put together a game plan on how to address this team, or well, without giving away any trade secrets, I guess. But I guess, what is the time investment for this process?
So it evolves, it builds, and it's a pretty well-defined process. So the assessment takes about 20 minutes per person. That's one time investment, and that is a good that alone is a good time investment. The next step is what we call a primer, and that's a 1 hour primer, and that's where you assemble people into a room or a Zoom call or whatever, and you say, okay, we've taken the assessment. What does it mean for all of us? Because every company does Dreamers a little differently, does Sages a little differently, and so that's a 1 hour. We call it a primer. It can be an hour to 90 minutes. If you want to continue beyond that, we have 2 4-hour workshops. One is the team building workshop where we put these people together, and the other one is the problem solving workshop, which includes design thinking. So those are 2 4-hour workshops. Beyond that, it does become a consulting engagement where if you have a huge company and you're like, I want to figure out how to do this end to end, we build custom plans, or sometimes people hire us and they want us to come in and just do the thing. And those are just custom. You just never know what that's going to be. But the end is 20 minutes, 1 hour, 4 hours, 4 hours.
Thank you. Okay, so Lauren Dews asks, what's the fastest you can see a team making through through the process after a reset?
Oh,
Does it depend on the stage that the team was in when the conditions, or has something changed?
I love this question. And I don't know if she meant that as a softball soapbox question. Lauren would not do that. But what I will tell you is you can look around the world and see teams that do this all the time. And I'm going to give you an example. The New England Patriots. Every year they introduce new players. And every year they compete for a Super Bowl until this year because they got rid of Tom Brady. So what I will tell you is great teams can do it very quickly. If you have a really strong team, and when I say team, by the way, we would limit a team to 12 people. 12 is a big team. We're really talking about 6 to 12 people. And if you have a strong team that has a strong shared middle model that trusts each other and good processes, when you bring someone in, they become like that team and they're less disruptive. But you have to have a team that lets them be who they are from the ground up. Now, when you do that, you can recycle fairly quickly. There are teams that recycle every 2 weeks. There are teams that I've seen recycle in a week. So you can do it really quickly. It just requires the individuals to be engaged, motivated, and feel creative freedom.
That's great. Okay. Paul Martin asks, how much do company values play into forming teams when considering creative preferences?
Oh, what's interesting, Paul, and I'm going to try to answer this while dodging some political issues. So what I will tell you is company values are what you write on paper. Culture is what people do every day. And those are almost never the same thing. So what an executive team sits down and writes on paper and says, these are our values. And when we're consultants, when we come in, what I will tell you is if you were living your company values, we wouldn't be there. So companies say, here are our company values. And when we get there, we find out from every single worker in the company, that's just stuff on paper. So the reality is you have to get really honest about what your culture is. And that's one of the reasons that Hidden Innovators starts with the individuals. It doesn't start with the executives. It starts with the people who are on the teams working, because those are the people who actually define your real culture. And when someone starts working at your company, that's the culture they're getting, not what you wrote on paper. And we will tell you unequivocally, people say, you used to hear this all the time. When people leave companies, they're actually leaving the manager. They're not. They're leaving the team. And so if your team is unaccepting of people, you're going to have these problems. But on the flip, if your team is very accepting of people, you can short circuit a lot of these problems.
I'm going to skip around a little bit because this one I think kind of relates to what you've been speaking on. Gary Purdy asks, how do team members relate when the boss carries authority that skews the levels of honesty?
Yep. So one of the things in my career that I've gotten asked to do a lot, and obviously being with Two Ravens, because a lot of what we do at Two Ravens turns out to be executive management consulting. And what I will tell you is a lot of what people depend on me to be is an objective voice in the room that levels that. And so Hidden Innovators as a company has this concept of what's called leveling, where no matter your title, it doesn't matter if you're the hippo, right? You got to get that out. And the team has to level. Everyone has to be equally represented. And their voice has to matter, or they shouldn't be there. So those are your two options. The executives, you see it all the time. They walk in a room and everybody shuts down. Everyone's experienced this. I mean, this is not new. That's not new information. Just someone being willing to say it might be new, but that's not new information. And when the executive walks in and shuts down, you're doing what the executive wants, and the company is only as good as that executive. And I'll kind of tail onto that for another time, maybe over beers or liquor, or even better. But what I will tell you is very few founders make good executives, and very few executives make good founders. And there's a reason.
Let's see. Jimmy asks, do you have anything in your model for one-on-one if someone doesn't respond in a group setting?
Oh yeah. So what's interesting is, and I started, when I was doing the presentation, I kind of had some of this in there. You're going to have to make a decision whether it's creative differences or someone's being an asshole. You have to make that decision. And creative differences indicate that both people have the best motivations. They all have a pure motivation. Hey, we're just trying to achieve the goal. So if everyone is at that place and you're disagreeing, you're probably okay. But there are people who are just trolls, who are jerks, and they don't belong. And so our model, a lot of times, sometimes those people are necessary to the process because of what, generally speaking, because of what they know or what they can do. So for some reason, you've kept them around at the company or you kept them as part of the team because they have a very specific talent set. We call those a subject matter expert. And if you're a team trying to make good decisions, you might bring that person in for an hour where you can pelt them with questions and get information so the rest of the team learns, but you get rid of them because they will derail your creative process. And you do have to make that decision. Hey, you're not really right for this process. What I will tell you is the assessment also tests for two things. So there's the creative personas, which I showed you. There's also a team player index, which indicates how good are you at being part of a team. And then there's another one called cognitive flexibility. How likely are you to do mental gymnastics as new information becomes available? Now, if you are not a good team player and you don't like new information, you don't belong on an innovation team. It's going to freak you out, and that's okay. That's okay. You can be a subject matter expert. And that's how our model handles that. So there's times when you have a group and you say, this person needs to be a subject matter expert because they're just derailing everybody else. And you have to make that decision.
Do you offer larger setting workshops? I know you mentioned that, there's 12 on a team, but do you have educational workshops that you do? I know you work a lot with Innovate Birmingham and their cohorts. Is that available for other groups?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So what we do, here's how the process would work if people are looking at larger organizations. You have to build some unit at a time. We like starting with the individuals and then the teams. What I will tell you is our primer, which is the 1 hour, sometimes we do it like a lunch and learn, right? It's the 60 to 90-minute primer. That has a large applicability, and actually having more people involved is good. And so you can do that with a full team as far as we're concerned. We've done it with up to 65 people, and we wouldn't mind doing it for 100 people if that's what you wanted to do. So there's that one. Now, once you break it into team building, you do need to break it into teams. And what I will tell you is we'll do 2 teams at a time. So it can be up to 24 people. And then we would just segment those. And if you want to do multiple of those, let's do them. But you do have to sit down and say, all right, you're a team now. You're acting like a team. You're going to do the team things. And when you get too many people, that breaks. So you start off with the bigger numbers and you get smaller as you go.
All right. April has another great question. I really like this one. She is asking, I'm wondering if your research shows that some generations, age, gender, etc., fall more into one type of creative type or the other. Like, are men more often tinkerers and women more often learners or dreamers or sages? That would be equivalent of a sage, I guess.
Yeah. So one of the things we had to do early when we were testing, and I would actually, I'm not the expert on this, Dr. Sutton is, during this research, and she could give a much better answer. But what I will tell you is we were trying to make sure that that did not happen. And if we saw those trends happening, we changed how we did the assessment and how we evaluated people. So our goal is to say that stuff doesn't happen, because I will tell you really briefly, there are these assessments out there and personality assessments and everything else. And what we are trying to do is build an inclusive product. And some of these other assessments, I'm not going to name any, but if they tell you you're an introvert and they tell your company you're an introvert, you may or may not get included on things because of that. That's an exclusivity moment, and we don't want that. So we built this intentionally to say it's not gender specific. It's not geographically or economically specific. We need more testing, and as we go, we're going to make sure that this works across all ages and demographics. So that is our goal. And so far, we've achieved that. You're muted if you're talking.
Sorry, I'm trying to get my 5-year-old to go upstairs so we can finish. No, this is great stuff. We love that that you've often this is something offered by your company. So would anyone in the audience be interested if Tech Birmingham were to be able to maybe work something out with the Ravens to offer maybe one of these workshops once things go back to normal.
Sounds like yes.
We got a yes.
Yes,
We've got lots of yeses here.
We got yeses.
All right, so it looks like I totally put you on the spot, Donnie. I'm sorry, but we'll get offline and we'll work something out so that when things can return to normal, people can get a taste of this. And I think, they'll see how helpful and beneficial this is for their businesses and their organizations.
Yeah, I would recommend it, Christina, before stuff returns to normal.
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you what's going to happen. We're already observing it. People are going to go back to the office and think things are like they were before, and it's going to create new conflicts, and they're not going to know how to manage them. Like, companies are in dire straits in the next 3 months in a lot of cases. So the conditions are not the same as they were before. You've now gone 2 months without income. Those are very different conditions. And if you think the stresses before were tough, if you think the stresses of, oh, I'm working remotely, that's hard. Try not making money for 2 months. And that's the reality of where we're headed. So I feel like people need to understand each other. And if anybody's interested, we can start that process today. There's really no reason to wait as far as Hidden Innovators is concerned. But yeah, definitely if TechBirmingham wants to do something, I think we would be kind of keen to that. I'd love to know Dion's creative persona. He's dodged it so far.
He has.
So I would love to wrangle him on that.
Yeah, the rest of Rebecca and I both have taken the Hidden Innovators assessments, and for me, it's been very eye-opening, to see how I function on a team. I've always just kind of suspected things, but to have this concrete data to help me illuminate some of my practices, it's great. So some of the audience members are predicting what Dion's persona is, and Ben has put Dion is a drinkerer.
That encompasses and enables all three.
That's the most popular persona, for what it's worth. Everyone loves that persona.
That is hilarious.
Well, with that, I guess now is a great time to wrap up and mention some of our other programs that we have coming up. Tomorrow, we've got a productivity BWIT Lunch and Learn. And I saw that some of our audience members here are signed up for tomorrow. So we'll see you tomorrow for learning the Pomodoro method or technique. Thank you all for being part of this and asking so many great questions. This is it excites me to see so much engagement in the chat and some very thoughtful questions. Thank you, Donnie. This was great.
That is absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. Our vision, Dion and I have talked about this for years. Our vision is that Birmingham will once again be known as innovative. And, depending on who you talk to, I would say it would be the third time in history. And we're really trying to help with that. And we believe that Birmingham is going to need to have organizations that understand individuals and let individuals be innovative to grow. So the opportunity to speak about this is fantastic. Thank you guys so much for everything you do. And thank you for giving me a moment to talk to everyone about it.
Well, I think we've all benefited so much from this. So thank you. Dion, I'll let you wrap us up.
Absolutely. Wow. Just fantastic stuff. Really, really a great session. Thank you, Donnie. Thank you to the Two Ravens team, to our attendees for spending time with us. Really excited. I love when you have action items and follow up after things, right? It just don't just leave it hanging in the ether, right? Like, how do we continue to build on this? So I'm super excited to see where this goes. Christina, Rebecca, thank you all so much for the work that you do. Seriously, round of applause. I know you all do a lot behind the scenes. I just want to make sure that people know what you all are putting into this. So maybe one of these days we'll share with everybody what I am. I'm pretty sure I'm a a dreamer mixed with a sage. So we'll figure out which one elevates to the top. But all that said, thanks again, everybody. Please stay safe. Make sure you reach out, engage with us, lean in, and we will look forward to seeing you all very soon. So appreciate it.
Bye. Oh, and I did put the assessment tool for everybody in the chat. There's the cameo, April, of my 5-year-old. He's being very patient, impatiently patient. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Thank y'all for being here.
Thanks, guys.